podcast where we create fantastical worlds with help from you, our listeners. My name is Rob Hilferty, and I'm here with Postmaster General to Pound Town, USA, Chris Prunty. As long as well as our continued special guest, Daniel Quinn. To quickly change the subject, I would like to point out that we have a very special interview with Kendra Mack today, aspiring author and all around interesting person. So we're going to go ahead and cut straight to the interview now. Hello, everyone. We are joined here today by Kendra Mack, an up and coming writer. For those of us who may not know anything about you, Kendra, why don't you go ahead and tell us about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I am a mostly a fiction writer. I'm also a poet. I write little rhymes and perform in formerly the North Shore area, but I recently moved to Medford, Massachusetts, so I'm more close to the Boston area. I write long form novels. It's my favorite form, but I also study fiction writing with Harvard Extension School, and through them, I've been writing more short stories these days and experimenting with that form. But my favorites are novel writing and mostly in the genres of contemporary and in the ways of poetry writing. I mostly stick to rhyming. It's more of my fun outlet.
Mm-hmm. That actually brings me. So I've had the great honor to actually read some of your work, and I'm very curious as to like what your influences are. I suppose because I can there's some conjecture I can make, but I'd rather hear it from you, like who you are really inspired by.
Yeah, sure. So in the ways of short story writing, a lot of short stories, they especially contemporary ones, they often go over my head. I feel like a little bit, and I like to stick to classics like Shirley Jackson short stories, suspense and horror, and those genres, which is funny because that's generally not what I read in novel when it comes to novels. I read more contemporary writers. Um, but I pick and choose from all over the place for the most part. I don't necessarily know. I'm sure that what I read influences my writing, but I don't know if it's necessarily always a one to one.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's funny because I think that when I'm very much the same way. Like I don't read horror novels or anything like that, but I think horror does better in general as in a short term format. So I think short stories are often way more effective when it comes to horror, just because of the intense emotion that you can evoke in such a short period of time. What kind of draws you to writing that kind of fiction?
Yeah, so it actually was sort of by accident when I started experimenting with short stories. I did write some short stories in college and some English classes, and just the life of a writer, just experimenting with forms for a long time. But I really started honing in on sort of a surreal style or experimenting with surrealism fairly recently, and it was just mainly out of fun. I can't I can't describe it other than I just needed some. I was in the middle of working on a novel that was contemporary coming of age, very realistic, no elements of fantasy, no elements of horror whatsoever, and I just needed some fun. And just writing something that's uh, more in genre just felt more fun to me.
Speaking of the genre, I notice in some of your short stories when there's a shift to that form, you tend to create these worlds that are like become like increasingly eerie, and things get unstable for the protagonist. So when you go about that from a point of view of craft, like how do you go about accomplishing that in the writing itself? Like what do you think are the elements that work for you when you try to create those kind of worlds?
That's a good question. So I my process is usually to start with a premise, which doesn't necessarily always lends itself to a plot or a particular world, but taking something that I'm familiar with or that I enjoy and just spinning it on its side a little bit. So for example, one of my short stories, I do work in a mill building, and I've lived in a mill building, and just having lived in New England my whole life, I've uh, been around mill buildings, grew up down the street from them, so they just are very interesting to me and have a lot of history around them, and just are really interesting in terms of having a world within them and just being a, an archive of a particular time, but they're reused and repurposed. And so starting with sort of a premise of like, if a building could see its whole history and talk about its whole history, what kind of narrative would that look like? Sort of starting with something small and growing a plot out of that.
Do you see there being like a difference in how you go about that when you're dealing with something that's really big, like a novel, versus say like a short story? Like, how does the form impact that?
I tend to lean my natural writing style tends to lean towards long form. I really have to try to keep it short. And that usually comes in plotting it out in terms of outlining. If it's something like a mill building story, that could be just, a short story, but then I have to keep it to a specific a shorter period of time, something a little bit more focused in terms of the characters rather than a novel, which is much longer, would have more, subplots and more complexities to it. And part of it is sometimes lately I've just been starting to experiment with a short story first, and if it's something that's wow, I can't capture this or what I want to say in a short story. Is this something that could potentially be a novel? Then starting exploring it from there. Whereas my process used to be, this is going to be a novel, and then wait a minute, maybe there's not enough here to make a novel, and then I have 50 pages of like, what is this even? So, and I think that's the nature of writing over time is figuring out a process that works, and then maybe eventually someday down the road it doesn't work. And I'm always learning and trying to try new processes out.
Speaking of processes, in the piece of fiction that I got a chance to read, one of the themes that are well, there's two things actually. The one is you have such a great sense of like intimacy, and ironically, in a story about a horse, there is a lot of human qualities, and there is something so deeply tragic and intimate about that story that I really love, especially with the relationship with her mom. Um, and then on the opposite end, for the second point, there's also a great sense of othering that you feel through the character, and I really, really love that as well. Are the are those like when you write? What's your process in that regard? Are you aiming for a theme? Are you aiming to evoke, or are you aiming to have a conversation with someone?
That's a good question. I would say I am trying to start with making a point or try to showcase something or an emotion or a feeling. And in the case of that particular story, it's a story about um a horse who is trying to pass as a human at a corporate dinner party, and that started with it, which is very absurd, and there's a lot of silly moments, because like hooves, and it's just very strange. But it started with the idea of passing at I as a queer woman have to navigate that all the time in the corporate world. So in that particular case, I think I was trying to make a point about what it feels like as a queer woman in the corporate workplace, and what that would feel like through something that no one who reading this would be able to experience, which is being a horse, but then relate to through a horse, and then make it fun and make it approachable. So it's not so um, I don't know. So that you could read it that way thematically, but it's also just hopefully would be more fun to read, if that makes sense.
Yeah, as I believe Daniel says all the time, it's a matter of hitting someone over the head with your ideas with like a 2x4. Is
Right. I don't want to be
um,
too direct, and then it's just then just your theme is showing.
Exactly.
right, right. But I think that like the way that you explore like those themes through genre is really fascinating, and I feel like I picked up on it pretty quickly, especially where when she's sitting in the bathroom and she hears her coworkers talking about her. I'm like, oh, totally get it. Totally understand what's happening here. Um, and I just found that really fascinating. Daniel and I often talk about how genre is kind of like downplayed or like looked
Mhm.
upon with like through like, you know, it's looked down upon basically. And it's like, do you not understand that like Toni Morrison has a ghost as one of her main characters? Do you not understand
Right.
that like all of Latin American fiction is like magical realism? And it's like, and yet you're like, it has ghosts in it. It's like, oh, it's about a horse. And it's like, what do you're missing out on so many amazing stories when you tend to poo poo genre fiction and stuff like that.
We
Yeah,
appreciate your crossover.
Yeah, that is my point. Yes, thank you.
and it makes it difficult to when I am, looking to uh, shop around some of these stories. Sometimes I don't quite know where the lines are drawn. I think a lot more and more literary magazines, they're looking sort of for their, literary fiction with a genre twist, but
Mhm.
there's still that line that, is this genre? Is this literary? I just can't wait to see those lines just totally dissolve.
Yeah, the only line that should exist is this good or is
Yes,
it
Right,
bad?
exactly.
Yeah, I mean it's like there's a whole conversation to be had about like populism in fiction and stuff like that compared to, you know, like the elitism of it. But I'm not going to get into that right now because that's like a whole other rant that I don't want to go on. But anyway, so you have a love for genre fiction, and I hate even calling it genre fiction,
Mhm.
but I do very much appreciate that. I feel like we can become friends just on that alone.
So, with that said, fine. Like whenever I'm reading one author's work, one book after another, I seem to notice trends of where even if I didn't know, I would be like, oh, I know who wrote this. What would you say would be like your watermark or like the theme or something that you routinely seem to bring up in your work?
That's another good question. I gravitate towards themes both in terms of the books that I like to read or the stories that I like to read, as well as write, is a feeling of otherness, or alienation in some way, or some a character who is looking from the outside in, or is standing off and standing out in some particular way. And I know like that's so broad, and so many stories are like that, and protagonists, they have to stand out in some particular way in order to be interesting. But I think it plays into my queerness. I like to read queer stories, and queerness isn't always necessarily like an LGBT character to me. It's someone who, whether it be a person or an animal or an object or whatever it may be, is living outside of mainstream lifestyle. And it is explore, and those are the stories that are really interesting to me. The characters that are taking um, an alternative approach to life. The typical straightforward rom-coms and things like that, with straight couples, and there's something that happens, and it's unfortunate, and someone gets in the way, and there's a love triangle. Like, those stories are great for some people. Those are just not generally the stories that I like to write or read.
It's interesting that you say that because now that I'm thinking of the short stories that you've written that I've read, particularly the one that takes place in this theme park where the protagonist essentially kind of becomes more and more alienated the more she learns about the world she's been thrust into. Like that's underlying all of that. And I wonder, in like the writing that keeps, or in the reading that you've been doing that keeps you inspired to keep writing, are there like, I don't know, like genre adjacent things you've read that have really gotten you there? Like, are there any pieces of work that you really like that present kind of an outsider protagonist that inspired you?
I would. I know I mentioned her at the beginning, but I just love Shirley Jackson so much because even if her main characters aren't necessarily uh, queer in the traditional sense, they do have that otherness about them. A book that I read recently that was just totally awesome, and had a this isn't one that would have a sort of a genre element to it. Um, the world was set in reality, but it was called "Politics: The Form of a Mortal Girl." by Andrea Lawler, and it's about a person who can shift their sex so they can
Oh,
be woman or man depending on, so there's that fantastical element in it, but the world that it's set in is they're in San Francisco, they're in Northampton for part of it, and it just was really fun to read. That was the most enjoyable book I've read in a really long time, and I hadn't read anything like that that straddled that line of just it felt like contemporary fiction, realistic, but then there was this very obvious not real element to it.
I have some questions for like emerging creatives in the sense that like you're a writer that's trying to get stuff out there, and I feel like a lot of creators, whether they're coming from like game writing, RPG writing, novel writing, like they don't have much of a sense of what's involved to get their work out there. Since you're actively submitting, like what are people up against when they've got to think about, okay, I've got this thing, it's really cool, I made it, now what do I do next? What's been your experience with that?
There's no one easy go-to guide that I have found. There's no like magic fix book or blog or anything that just outlines this is the path to publication for you. It's a lot of pooling of different resources and it takes a lot of time. I could start by talking about at least trying to get short stories published. On that side, it was really helpful and eye-opening to me to take. I took a an afternoon course with Grub Street, Creative Writing Center out of Boston, where someone who had has published short stories who essentially validated the feelings of this is really hard and it takes a lot of time and it's okay to get rejected over and over again. P.S. Here's a list of popular literary journals that if you're writing literary short stories that you might want to target, and just going through best practices that way about cover letters and things like that. That was hugely helpful, and it was just I was, and then I left that class thinking, how is anyone supposed to know this unless,
Right.
I mean, you can Google to these questions to death, but you'll find so many different answers and so many different best practices. And I found that the best bet is to talk to someone who has actually been published and say like what worked for them, or like what worked and what didn't, and also just commiserating with rejection because it just happens. So often just get it and not taking it personally and just getting used to that feeling. On the novel side of things, that was also, I took a couple just very short classes years ago. One of them was through Writer's Digest. I think it was a webinar. That was it was a more in-depth webinar. It was something you had to like sign up for, and that's the other thing that kind of gets me about the path to publication is that there is a slight barrier to entry if you want to get information faster or find these resources faster. You can dig through a bunch of free resources online. It's just, and make a full list of all of the literary journals that, or literary journals that might make sense for you. Or if you're publishing, looking to publish a novel, all of the agents and how agenting works and querying works. But darn, a lot of the good resources out there, they cost at least a little bit of money, whether it be a course or a webinar or something like that. At least that's what I have found. Some of the most helpful resources did cost me money, and I think it's important to talk about that because there's this feeling out there that I've at least perceived in the writing world. It's just like, oh, if you just work hard enough and you just keep submitting and you just keep trying, you'll get it.
Mhm.
Which that might be true, and might be true for a lot of people, but um, it a lot of good resources still cost money.
How would you say like community factors into that, like in terms of like planning for your work and trying to get it out there?
Right. So, I mean, the only reason why I was able to find, well, the main reason why I was able to find a writing group that has been so useful to me was because that I invested in going to in a Grub Street membership, so going to the creative writing center and taking classes with them, and then going to the conference where I was able to connect with people there. There are free community resources out there. At the time, I was living in a little town that I just moved from recently, where there just wasn't the writing community that I felt that I needed for my writing. I wasn't getting the feedback that I wanted, and I was struggling to find that community online. And just knowing that it was in Boston,
Mhm.
and that if I went to a conference, I would be able to connect with people there, and just making that opportunity worth it. It was worth it to me to invest in it, and I feel like I've improved as a writer, and also have learned to take my writing more seriously since connecting with other writers as well.
So you'd say like when it comes to revision, like the role of community is revision, right? Like so like getting people to look at your stuff. So it makes me think when you have other kinds of creators, 'cause we have people working, say, on RPGs and they're working on games that are collaborative, like getting your stuff out soon enough so people can look at it is good. So I'd ask you then, like in revision, were there things that were really helpful that you learned working with other people or even like through the courses you went through to improve your work, after you've gone through that process?
Oh, absolutely. It's getting feedback is so invaluable. And I think I can only speak from my experience, because I'm sure for some writers it's more helpful for them to get feedback on a piece of writing or creative project when they're later on in the process. Um, I tend to be that way. I tend to be a little bit more guarded of my earlier drafts, just because I know they're not so great, and I kind of know what they got to fix at a surface level. But then I know there's things I have to fix that I'm not going to be able to catch, and that I need other eyes to look on it. Whereas others are more prefer to be more collaborative from the beginning, and that's also just learning how you like to work as a creative. And I think just experimenting with different processes in terms of collaboration also is hugely helpful. If you collaborate at the beginning of a project and you're like, wait, this isn't really working for me. I need to go back and work on this a little bit on my own first, and then get it out there. I say that's totally fine. I can
Yeah,
say that with my so I'm in the process of pitching a novel right now that is about a young woman who comes to terms with her sexuality while uh, recreating Henry David Thoreau's Walden Pond experiment out in the woods of New Hampshire. Not really any genre elements there, but it's been my pride and joy and
Post-apocalypse.
my labor of love for the past 4 years. And I didn't get any beta readers on it until I had completed a full draft, and I felt like, I feel like it's good as it's gonna be. And then I had people read it.
Mm.
That was after I had gone to the first writers conference, and I met a couple folks who we read each other's works as beta readers, because we were writing similar types of coming of age, 20 somethings, post college type of novels. And so it was sort of like, I'll read yours, you read mine. It was a nice trade off, and just getting their feedback it totally opened my eyes of like, there's so much that I'm missing here, and so many questions that they had that I was just like, yeah, why would things I wouldn't have asked myself
It's
that
like
readers are
playtesting.
absolutely going to ask.
yeah, that actually brings me back. It sounds like between everything that you've gone through so far, you've really grown as as a reader and a writer. I'm kind of curious. What do you think some of the biggest improvements to your writing has been as a result of everything that you've been doing?
Yeah, I would say that I struggle most with just plot, which is funny because I write stories and novels, and especially when you're working a novel, it's there's so many complexities in the ways of plot. But because I tend to start with a premise and or a character, I get really involved in the characters and I get involved in the premise and don't think so much first about progression of scenes and building suspense and leading to a climax and resolution, or the general structure of what it would be and how I'm going to get to the end. And uh, both collaboratively and in taking classes, plot is something that I have. I like to think that I'm continuously improving on. I'm in a suspense class right now, which has been really fun because that's just not naturally a genre that I would gravitate to. I don't really read very many thrillers, and I don't gravitate really towards writing, thriller types of stories or novels. So, but just learning the craft of how those are crafted um, is helpful for other genres as well, and I've been able to apply it.
You a pantser or are you a plotter?
I used to be a pantser, but I am slowly converting over to being a plotter because it saves me so much time in
So
the long run.
testing and plotting is what you're saying are two things we should be doing.
I mean, everyone. I can't tell anyone how to write a book or write a short story because everyone has their different processes. Some people swear that just getting it all out and going and doing the just flying with whatever comes out of your heart on the page is what's right. And then maybe applying an outline to it after the fact. For me, that's with the novel. That I'm pitching right now, it started out as just like, here's my heart on the page, and then I was just like, wait a minute, the where's the ending? Like, where's the beginning, middle, end? It doesn't really go. So I was just like, man, I am never writing a novel without at least a semblance of knowing what the ending is first, ever again, because that was 4 years of editing that.
Do you think you could have cut it down to like 2 years without, with having learned everything that you have thus far?
Maybe, maybe it's hard to say.
That's a hard no.
I
Hard no, and that's totally
I
fine.
I think I had to suffer a little bit. Is that really masochist of me? I feel like I had to suffer through the process.
Hey, no pain, no gain.
Deserve this.
Yeah, not at all. I mean, some people, I mean, the best way to learn sometimes is by touching a hot stove, and now you know not to do that ever again, right?
And for me, touching the hot stove is writing a novel without having an ending in mind. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Chris, I think you had another question.
Yes. The question that I had is because I've heard stories of people kind of doing this to themselves, of where they've just written themselves such into a corner that they have to pretty much start over from scratch. Have you ever had those kind of moments where you just pretty much have to be like, well, time to go back from the start and just start over?
Thankfully, not with a novel length manuscript. There's usually bits and pieces that I've been able to salvage and use, especially in the ways of characters, because I tend to hone in on a particular, at least one character that stands out really strong to me, and they can evolve over time, but it's usually they'll stay consistent throughout, and it's the plot and maybe the other characters that have to change around them. In one of the radical revisions that I did of this latest novel manuscript is just one character. I just had to be like, they just don't make sense for the story. They just don't make sense in this particular role. So I cut them completely. I was just like, you know what? And it was really hard to do that because when you've invested time into creating a character, to say, okay, you are fully formed in my mind and I've spent so much time on you, but you just like isn't your story, to just, I don't know. They say kill your darlings, but I like to think of more not just like killing them, but like setting them aside, and maybe there's another story that it would make more sense for them. where
They're
they
as
could
good
just
as
focus.
dead, though.
They're set aside. They're set aside. I don't like
uh,
thinking of them as being killed.
Look, you can think of it as however you want, but they're dead. Like
Put them in the
they're just
trunk. Maybe they'll have some air at the end. Who knows?
yeah. But I think what you're saying is actually really important because the phrase "kill your darlings"
Mhm.
comes up so often, but people really who don't necessarily go through that creative process don't understand what it's actually like to get rid of someone who, like you said,
Mhm.
you've gone through a whole process to get to know them. And you like look at them and you're looking at that backspace bar and you're
You're like,
looking at the
oh.
delete key and you're like, I'm just, but I actually I do something very similar where if I'm writing right and I see something, whether it be a character or a line,
Mhm.
I'm like, all right, I'm gonna take this out because it really doesn't fit, but I'm gonna drag it over to my pile of regret, which is my ideas that I may or may not use later. So I deeply I'm right there with you. Like I cannot tell you how much I feel those words that you're saying right now because I've got a whole file I'm looking at right now that's just full of just
Just
lines and characters.
regret. Full of regret.
I'm
It's
tell
Labeled
not even
darlings.
regret.
Darling.
Yeah, darlings. Yeah, this is my killed darlings file for sure.
no,
Yeah,
no, it would be a great slash terrible story idea. It would be just to take all of your darlings
Oh
from
my
like that you've killed off and just like put them all in a world, in a room, in a story. It's like totally not even from
god.
totally different stories that they don't even make sense together, and just let them have at it and just let them have the revenge on you,
that
the
is a
writer.
postmodern. That's a postmodern literature novel if I've ever read it. Like
Ken, you gotta write
it's
it
so close.
next. Yeah.
It's like on the edge of parody. Like I feel like that's also an Onion article somewhere.
Mhm.
You know, where it's
Or
like
McSweeney's.
failed right. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
Killed darlings seek revenge on writer.
Honestly, you could call a novel. Look, we're giving out free ideas here. The the title of the novel is "Killed
Yeah,
Darlings."
there
I
you
mean,
go.
come on,
It's a
yeah,
mystery novel, of course.
yeah.
Uh,
Look, and you didn't have to pay for a fancy course for that at all. Like
Yeah.
that's free money. That's free real estate
there you
right
Oh
there
go.
my
for
god.
everyone out there.
I mean, here's a
Yeah.
practical question for you. I feel like we should ask a lot of people who are making stuff. Like, so how do you physically go about the process of keeping your momentum up? Right. So people sit down and they're like, I'm gonna write a story. They don't just sit down for 17 hours and finish their story and get back to it. Like, what do you do to get that story done?
If it's something that's shorter, I'm a little bit more disciplined about it, and uh, I'll it could just because it feels more digestible. I feel like okay, I can write a crappy first draft and have a semblance of a plot and clean it up later. But something like a novel, I more and more find that to keep momentum up, I have to have something to write to, like whether it be the next scene that I'm excited about,
Mhm.
um, or something that I'm excited to explore. It's a little bit of an obsession type of thing. It's like I gotta get it done. I don't know. It's just like
So
even
guilt? You're saying guilt.
guilt, yeah, there's a lot of like Catholic guilt there. It's just like I've told people I've written gonna writing the story, so it's got to get written. But it is hard without having deadlines. I do self-impose deadlines for myself,
Mhm.
which sounds crazy, but I mean whatever gets you in the chair to get it done.
I heard you
I
withhold
have
alcohol too.
Yes, that is another method that I use
Sounds smart.
sometimes. Yeah, to or just like I say I can't I'm gonna sound crazy here, but it's like I can't have something that I enjoy until I finish this particular draft if I'm close, the opposite way. I say I will treat myself after this particular draft because, when you're out of school, the grades stop coming and the deadlines of this paper is due at the end of the semester. That goes away, and but that kind of structure worked really well for me in academia. And in fact, like when I graduated college, I was a bit lost for a bit. I was just like, where's my report card? Where's my deadlines? Like, where's my things to turn things in? And with that, but because that structure, in terms of even for creative projects that are for personal, um, fulfillment just it falls to the wayside if I don't have some sort of from regiment. But I'm not a writer that I don't write every day. Some writers are like I wake up at 6 a.m. and I write for 2 hours every day. I'm not like that. I don't have a set schedule for when and how I write. It's mostly deadline driven by fake deadlines that I make up myself, or withholding things from myself.
So some
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Daniel says that's guilt. That to me sounds more like, capital T, the dark urge. Like you must quell the dark urge that is writing. You know.
uh, well,
See,
and some people say, like, if you don't enjoy writing, then don't do it, or like you should just feel compelled to write. But it's just writing is not the process is not always enjoyable. Like sitting down and writing is not. I I I don't know who said the phrase, but the phrase of I don't like writing, I like having written. It
Mhm.
feels very true to me. Like
oh,
sitting
Yes.
down and writing in the blank page just um I don't always find it enjoyable, but I like when it's done most of the time.
yeah. I mean, I think for a lot of people, writing, at least artists in general, art is something you do because you need to do it. And I've talked to a bunch of artist friends of mine who are like, if I wasn't doing this, I'd be doing it anyway. And
Hmm.
I feel that's with me, especially with writing. My writing is therapy. And it sounds like for you, that's kind of in a similar vein where it's like, it doesn't matter. You'd be doing this no matter what. Am I right in that regard? Or is that,
Yeah, I would say like probably a creative break after in college. I studied communication. I wasn't writing, besides a couple creative writing classes that I took. I wasn't seriously writing at all. And then I just found my way back to it after a brief period because I just felt like I needed something beyond just the 9 to 5 job, just to feel creative fulfillment that I wasn't getting. Um, yeah, I don't think I'll ever not write. I don't know what it is.
yeah. All right. So we're going to pivot away from the writing for just a moment because I have a question that didn't occur to me. Like we're not primarily we are primarily a world building podcast, but there is a very deep root that comes into with like specifically tabletop role playing games.
Mhm.
Have you yourself ever played a tabletop role playing game?
I have not. No.
Wow.
She's
Wow.
learning
Mm.
Okay.
though.
Yeah, no,
Wait.
I I am confident in my abilities to learn, but I have
All right.
not.
Honestly, it's real simple. You just roll some dice and that's just about it.
Yep.
Like you roll some dice and you make shit up and then that's the best part of it, I can tell you.
Got it.
Okay. And I think that is actually the perfect segue
And
to now roll some dice ourselves.
make shit up.
And yes, absolutely.
Yay.
So yeah, so
Yay.
this brings us to our official world building jam session where I'm going to roll some dice and based on those die rolls, they're going to tell us what our genre is between science fiction, fantasy, horror, modern day, romance, or we have to combine two in some kind of ungodly abomination. Uh, Next, we're going to roll another die, and we're going to determine the subject, whether it be an item, a monster, a place, a historical figure, an event, or again, roll two, abomination, yada yada. And then once that's determined, we're going to figure out the theme, whether it be madness, sacrifice, love, metamorphosis, pride and honor, the unspeakable, triumph, or hope. And once that's all done, once we create a scenario based around that, we're then going to throw in a twist and fuck it all up, but we got to get there first.
Yeah.
So let's roll some dice and see what we get. First things first, we got the genre die. So we have science fiction
Ooh.
right off the bat.
All right.
Yeah.
Nice.
All right. Next, we've got the subject, which is a place. And
Okay.
then we have the theme. Oh, that's not good. The theme is love.
Ooh.
And then, so, Kendra, we have a science fiction place with a theme of love. And if you could go, because you're our special guest, you get to start us off. So science fiction, a place, and the theme of love. So go ahead.
I guess it's science if it's like biology, right?
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
I'm right. I have a notebook here. I'm like really prepared for this. I just 'cause I was like I knew this was coming, and then the love thing just like threw me. Okay.
Yeah,
And
that's why we randomize it, because it's
yeah,
way more fun when
yeah,
you're like, oh God, pay attention.
I know. Yes. Okay. Um.
Whatever excites you is usually what you want to go with.
Love does not excite me. Is that terrible?
Your
I
stories have so much love in
Actually,
them. Yeah.
so no, that's fine. If you want to go with a dark love story,
Hmm.
that's fine. It's like, oh yeah, love, like heartache or heartbreak
Yeah.
or something like that. That's also in the theme of love, just a really fucked up version of love.
Okay.
It is very fucked up way a love story, right?
What is?
You?
Oh
I
yeah,
know
it's
it's
true.
about the guy falling in love with people. And
Oh,
Yeah.
yes, the show You.
Dark,
Yes.
but that's definitely about love
Yeah,
in some way.
like, what? Like, I will come across the hall and slap you. Like, what are you talking about?
Hey, I mean, X-Files was a love story, guys, and I don't care what anyone says, but it is absolutely a love story.
Okay, they don't. Okay, that's whatever.
We could talk about
Between
that.
who? Mulder and his sister?
Mulder
Like
and
Mulder and the
Scully,
aliens?
obviously.
Oh, you're so full of shit, Daniel.
There is an
Come on.
episode halfway through the series where they clearly have been sleeping together the whole time. It's 5 minutes of the beginning of the episode easily missed. Proves my point.
Daniel, your slash fiction does not fucking count in fucking X-Files, all right? Oh my God. I mean, no, don't get me like, that's the thing. I think it's a more interesting story if there is no or little romantic involvement between the two characters.
They've been sleeping together like through half the series.
Again, slash fiction does not count.
All right. I think you might have to be like, no, do this over.
No, that's fine. What do you got? What do you got?
Don't do
What do you
over.
got? Let's
Because I
go.
like don't know if this is science fiction or not.
It's gonna be.
Yep. We're gonna make it.
Okay. All right. Well, the place is a pet shop,
Okay.
and somebody goes into a pet shop and falls in love with a pet that they absolutely have to take home with them, but the pet is not a pet that you would normally think of, like a cat or a dog.
Ooh.
Okay. All right. I'm liking this idea.
Is it a bad pet or a good pet?
It could be a very bad pet.
Can we expand upon this and have it be like this is a specialty shop? Like the shop itself is basically the epicenter for a sudden explosion in this type of adoption of animal.
Oh,
and
yeah.
We could do aliens, but that's kind of lame and not what I'm into. I like the idea of like unpopular animal suddenly becomes popular specifically because of this one particular pet shop.
Oh my God, what animal does everyone hate then?
Komodo dragons.
Komodo dragon?
No. Someone pick a more reasonable animal, because I think Komodo dragons.
Monkfish.
No, what? No, come on.
Yeah.
Get out of here. No one's gonna fall in love with a monkfish.
Something that we could possibly. You want to be able to hug it, right, and touch it.
I mean,
but
what about?
It should also be vaguely repulsive, right?
Oh,
like,
true.
That's what I'm thinking.
I mean, with the monkfish, it's just shape of water.
Yeah,
right. And that's what we're trying to avoid. Yeah. All right.
Something that could get leprosy, like an armadillo.
Armadillo. I'm thinking like eels, like electric eels.
Ooh.
I don't know how you would take an electric eel
Let's go with
home.
that.
Yeah, no, let's do electric eel. That's totally fine.
Okay, so maybe the shop, if it's eels, right? They found a way to like inject them or add something into their like genetic makeup that maybe makes them glow or is interesting in some way. And that's why people are buying them like crazy.
I'm thinking like pheromones or some kind of hypnotic pattern.
Hypnotic pattern. I like that.
Yeah. Like there's some kind of bioluminescence or something like that. Or maybe there's some kind of like, maybe it's like, oh, just touch the water and they've secreted some kind of pheromone that like is evaporated or like is absorbed through the skin, and all of a sudden you're like
Oh,
just
okay.
enraptured by this eel, right?
I think so. In the book that Blade Runner is based on, there was this thing called a mood organ that they'd push, and it would change people's emotions. So maybe, like you're saying, with this hypnotic like pattern, it can influence your mood. So the reason why people fall in love with them is because it makes them feel a certain way. So if you're really sad, you want to pick me up, you buy one of these eels, it makes you happy. But there's got to be some dark side to it.
Well, actually, that's where the twist can potentially come in.
Yeah, yeah.
But Kendra, I want you to add a little bit more to it. What do you think? There's one other thing that I know you have in you. Like, what do you get? What are you thinking?
Well, I like Daniel's idea of it. You want to take them home for some reason, but the bad effects is that they electrify you, or there's something like some negative repercussion to having them in your house. I just don't know.
Like an addiction, maybe.
Addiction to eels. Oh my
Oh
gosh.
no, they have a very short lifespan, so you have to
Oh,
continuously buy these
yes.
eels
Buy
over
more
and
of them.
over again.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, this is just a
Okay.
drug
This
addiction
is
now.
yeah. It's okay. This is really
It's a
bizarre. I'm
perfect
kind of
business,
digging
though.
it.
I
I
mean,
don't know what monster I created. Like, what is this?
it's a great
This is
business.
how this works, though. This is
Yeah.
totally fine.
Like, if I was in
Okay.
this business, I would totally be into it because I could just pop up these stores, sell them like gangbusters, and they have to keep coming back.
Yes. Okay. So we're at the point where we can now go ahead and throw in a twist to make this even worse for you. And we're gonna,
Gosh.
I'm gonna roll the die. I'm gonna figure it out. Okay. Let's see what we get. All right. Okay. Okay. Now add in some undead. Is
Oh my goodness.
Kendra, add in some undead.
Um, there's no way to oh god, no, that they'd still be dead, and that they'd not be undead, they'd still be dead. Um,
Well, what were you thinking?
I was thinking there's no way to dispose of the eels, so you just collect them in your house, and that's also a problem, like a dead eel hoarder situation. No, gosh.
Okay, I think the first thing that we have to determine
Mhm.
what is undead, the human or the eel.
Yeah, that's a good question. So, do you want to go with the eel? Because we can make that work.
I think that the eel would make more sense, or
Okay.
such it'd be more fun to be undead.
Maybe then
Okay,
the eel like doesn't really die.
explain.
So maybe we think the eel dies, but it gets out of its tank somehow to the person it's hypnotized.
And it shed its skin.
Yes. And then
Okay.
replaces the person or attaches to him.
Okay, that is literally an Are You Afraid of the Dark episode, so I'm gonna go ahead and reject that answer.
Wait, what are you afraid the duck?
It's the one with Tien Tamara Maori where they have an iguana.
Well, that's very
And
specific.
You like the idea of
yeah. Oh, I know.
the eel going
I
through a
love Are You Afraid of the
metamorphosis?
Dark. Get out of here.
Ooh, a metamorphosis. I like that.
An undead metamorphosis. Go ahead. Remember, we have to add in undead. That's what the rules
Right.
say. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
So if the eel is undergoing a metamorphosis and it attaches to the person, maybe the person becomes the undead with the eel in it.
Wait, say that again?
So like the eel attaches to the person. It's gone through its metamorphosis, and now the people are the zombies. They're not like literally zombies, but they're zombies in the sense that they have to keep buying more eels for their friends and their family to then add the eels to those people. So you effectively have a zombie apocalypse.
So you're just really passionate about eels, and you're like, "Hey, man, you got to get these."
Yes.
This is yeah, this one really went off the rails with that twist.
It really is just drug addiction.
Yeah, it's basically everyone's buying eels, and then these eels are populating the world.
Here, this guy's
Okay.
growing a new strain of eels.
All right. Well, hold on. I've kind of got an idea.
Okay.
All right. So these eels eventually use I like what you were saying, Daniel, where it's a matter of it's not like a replacement where it's like body snatcher type thing,
Yeah.
but imagine that like there's now a colony of eels living inside you and they're using you as a biome, like a meat
Yes.
kind of ride around in. I think that's I think that's what I would want to go with, is like imagine like cutting open a human
It's
that's
full
like
of eels.
full, like just
Oh
full
God.
of eels. Yeah,
Oh.
horrifying.
Oh.
I
Yes. I love that.
I don't know how we went from sci-fi to horror, but that's what I mean.
I mean, that's very
That's what I want to
zombie-like.
do.
Okay, I love that.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh wow. So are they eating the eels to like get inside the people? I guess I'm not clear on
Well,
how the
It's all
eels are
eels
getting.
now.
I mean, maybe when you go to you replace the water or whatever, there's really tiny eel babies that come out of the eel that get in your skin.
Oh yeah, like they lay eggs like inside your
Hmm.
skin or something like that.
Yeah.
Oh, it's like a jade wasp situation
Yeah.
where, yeah,
It's
okay,
disgusting.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they don't want to
Wow.
kill you. They need a host body.
Okay. All right.
Oh
I
my
don't think.
goodness.
Yeah, I don't think we're gonna do anything, but
Well, you
Where
know,
did
like,
where did the love go?
well, it's about the population of eel society. Like this brings me back, in fact, Kendra, to one of your stories that was like a spin on Little Shop of Horrors, where you had a plant that found a way of populating itself by, essentially mating with protagonists.
Yeah, yeah. That was
I mean,
something.
this is just the life cycle of the eel.
Yeah,
Mating just so happens to be part of it. I mean, mating is love sometimes, you know. So,
it's
I mean,
love in a
oh,
time of
you know what?
coronavirus. You know.
Hold on, hold on, hold on. I got it. Okay, I got it.
Okay.
All right. The eel cannot inject you and infest you with its brood unless the human host is in love with the eel.
Oh, that's perfect.
Oh.
Oh.
It's the hypnotizing stuff. That's why it wants you
It's
to do that.
Yeah, it's the good old Ariel from the Little Mermaid Gambit. Like that's
Yes,
basically what's going
but
on.
with colors.
Yeah, and I also think like some kind of weird pheromone situation might work
Oh
as
my,
well.
that's kind of like that Octavia Butler story where they inject like the brood into the humans. There's these bug people that like keep humans as pets. That's almost the
Oh
same
man.
story.
All right. All right. Well, I've not read that one, but that sounds gross, and I do love Octavia
It's
Butler.
So
horrifying.
so what you're saying is that this is completely, this is normal. This is-
Totally.
Yeah. Why not? I mean, in this universe that we've created, I mean, again, this is free real estate for everyone who wants to make like a, you know what, the new Twilight Zone would probably pick this up. So, all right. All right, Kendra, that's going to conclude our world building jam. That was absolute chaos and I love it.
that
Thank you.
yes,
Yeah.
I'm here to supply the chaos apparently. And eels.
Yeah. All right. So how about this? We're going to go ahead and roll into our rapid fire questions. Are you ready?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so my wife wants to know, is cereal a soup?
No.
Yes.
Okay.
Ooh, two no's.
All right. What have you been playing or reading recently?
I have been reading um I An Absolutely Remarkable Thing by Hank Green. I've been listening to it on audiobook actually because all my books are in boxes. I'm in the middle of moving.
Understandable. All right, and tell us someone who you want to shout out who's not yourself.
I am shouting out my partner Aisha for putting up with me with this move that we are going through right now, into our new apartment.
All right, and finally, um, I forgot my last question. Oh wait, no. Finally, tell us where we can plug yourself. Tell us where we can find you. Tell us what we can be interested in. If you need representation, anything like that.
Yeah, of course. So my website is kendramackwrites.com, and I'm also on Twitter at kendramac, M-A-C-K, and I am currently pitching a novel, coming of age story about a young woman trying to recreate Henry David Thoreau's Walden Pond experiment.
All right. Kendra, thank you so much for a really fun and enjoyable interview. And yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. This is so much fun.
I actually read that story about the horse. I really liked it.
It's good,
Or
right?
yeah, yeah.
It's creepy. I really like too, like how we talked about how you apply different methods when you're dealing with short stories versus novels, and she's working on both.
Yeah, this was actually a really fun interview because I think that it's one of the first ones that we really got to talk deep about like the craft of writing,
Mm-hmm.
which is like the whole conversation we had surrounding how she kind of gets better at it, the processes of where you can go to get better at it and stuff like that. I think that's something that is we often talk about like RPGs, and
Yeah.
we talk to game designers and kind of have a heavy focus on D&D and stuff like that, but this is the first one where it's like, no, I don't play any of that nerd shit. Let's just talk about like fucking straight up writing.
And like, how do you
really,
get down and do it? Like get into the
yeah.
weeds and actually do the work.
Yeah, I think that the closest thing that we had to that was our interview with James L. Sutter.
Yeah.
But this was the first one where it's like, no, let's talk about craft. And I love stuff like that. I love getting into the mechanics of it more than anything else.
Ooh, also
Um,
eels.
yeah, I was going to say also probably one of the coolest and weirdest like world building jam sessions that we've ever had. Like just utterly bizarre and like, oh
Surreal.
man. Yes, I think surreal. I would even go so far as to call it absurdist,
Mhm.
but
That's her
that
thing, though. It makes sense.
I would agree with that. I
Yeah.
think that reading some of her other works, it's kind of her style,
Yeah.
at least when it comes to her genre stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
So that'll do it for this episode of World Build with us. We hope you enjoyed it. And if you ever want to send us a prompt or an email or just tell us, that we look nice today, you can go ahead and send us an email at worldbuildwithus@gmail.com. Or if you'd rather send it in the form of a tweet or DM, you can send it to @Let's World Build. And remember, folks, have a great week. We love you very much. And just take care of yourselves.